boss cut my salary by 35% after 19 years with no notice, but I knew something they didn't. After 19 years of breaking my back for this company, I held the notice in my trembling hands, my salary gutted by 35% without a single word of warning. As rage and betrayal washed over me, a slight smile crept across my face. They didn't know about the digital ledger I'd been keeping, meticulously documenting every shadowy transaction, every whispered threat, every corporate secret they thought was buried. They had just made their final mistake, and now the question wasn't whether I would survive this betrayal, but whether they would survive what I was about to unleash. The tiny red light on my phone blinked steadily as Director Carson's voice grew louder. My finger trembled slightly against the record button hidden beneath my desk. "Your performance isn't meeting expectations," he sneered, looming over me like a storm cloud. 19 years at Meridian Technologies, and this was my reward, watching a man 14 years my junior, who'd been with the company barely 3 years, tell me I wasn't good enough. "The numbers show my team exceeded targets by 17% this quarter," I replied, keeping my voice level despite the heat rising in my chest. The promotion I'd been promised, the one I'd worked nights and weekends for, had mysteriously vanished last week, only to reappear on Carson's brother-in-law's desk this morning. Carson's jaw tightened. "Numbers can be interpreted many ways, Richard." He dropped a folder onto my keyboard. "I've decided to reassign the Blackwell project to Greg's team." "The Blackwell project? My project? The one I built from nothing into our biggest account. That project's been mine for 6 years," I managed, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Not anymore." His smile never reached his eyes. "And I'm cutting your department's budget by 40%. You'll need to let 2 people go by Friday." My stomach clenched. "That's nearly half my team." "Business decisions aren't personal, Richard." He checked his watch theatrically. "Speaking of which, I need the Henderson presentation in an hour." "The one due next week?" "Plans change." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and moving forward, your salary is being adjusted to reflect your diminished responsibilities." The papers he'd casually tossed on my desk confirmed it, a 35% reduction. Just enough to keep me employed, just enough to crush me beneath a mortgage I could now barely afford. Just enough to make me desperate. What Carson didn't know was that desperation had already driven me to protect myself. 3 months of his increasingly bizarre demands, project reassignments, and thinly veiled threats had pushed me to start documenting everything. The recording app on my phone captured our 4th off-record meeting this week. As Carson's footsteps faded down the hallway, I ran my fingers over the envelope containing my financial execution. 19 years distilled into a single percentage. I joined Meridian when we were still operating out of a converted warehouse, when Victoria Chin was still pitching to reluctant investors, when our product existed more in dreams than in code. I'd sacrificed birthdays, anniversaries, my children's recitals, all for the promise that loyalty would be rewarded. Now I knew better. The familiar weight of betrayal settled over me like an old coat. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to push me out of what I'd built. For years ago, when the company went public, there had been a similar purge of legacy employees whose stock options were about to fully vest. I'd survived that round by making myself indispensable to the Blackwell project. This time felt different, more calculated, more personal. I tucked the salary reduction notice into my bag and stepped out to the break room, needing caffeine to clear the fog of shock. The hallway that had once felt like a second home now seemed hostile territory. Had the other executives known this was coming? Were they watching, waiting to see if I would break? In the break room, Elena from accounting touched my arm sympathetically. "You look like someone kicked your dog," she whispered, glancing around to make sure we were alone. "Carson's cutting my salary by 35% and taking the Blackwell account," I said, the words tasting bitter. Her eyes widened. "That's not what he told finance. He submitted paperwork saying you requested reduced responsibilities for personal reasons." "What?" The mug slipped from my hand, shattering against the floor. Coffee splashed across my shoes, but I barely noticed. "There's more," Elena hesitated, lowering her voice. "The budget report shows the money from your salary cut isn't staying in your department. It's being transferred to a consulting company called Phoenix Solutions." The name hit me like a physical blow. Phoenix Solutions was the company Carson's wife had started last year. Elena leaned closer. "Richard, I've been seeing some other irregularities. Expense reports that don't match security timestamps. Vendor payments to companies that don't seem to exist." I studied her face. Elena Martinez had joined Meridian around the same time as Carson, but unlike him, she'd always treated the long-timers with respect. Her expertise in forensic accounting had earned her a reputation for catching errors nobody else noticed. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked quietly. She met my eyes. Because I've been watching them target people like you, people who know too much about how things used to work. This company is changing and not for the better. The janitor pushed his cart into the break room and Elena straightened, her voice shifting to casual workplace chatter. So anyway, that report should be ready by tomorrow, she said loudly, then mouthed, "We'll talk later," as she walked away. I knelt to pick up the broken pieces of ceramic, a fitting metaphor for my career. The janitor, Roy, who'd been with Meridian even longer than I had, shook his head sympathetically. "Let me get that, Mr. Chin," he said, reaching for the broom. "Bad day?" "The worst," I admitted. Roy's weathered face creased with understanding. "Been seeing a lot of those around here lately. Good people getting pushed out, new folks with fancy titles taking over." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "They don't know I'm still here when they have their late meetings. They think the cleaning staff is invisible." I looked up sharply. "What have you heard?" "Enough to know I've been updating my resume," he replied cryptically. "And enough to know you might want to check the server logs for conference room C. Especially after hours." He tapped his temple. "The old system still keeps backup recordings. They installed the new one but never fully decommissioned ours." I stared at him, understanding dawning. Roy had been part of the facilities team that installed our first conference room recording system long before Carson's arrival. "Thanks, Roy," I said quietly. He nodded once. 19 years you've been here, right? Always treated us with respect. That means something to some of us, even if not to them." Back at my desk, I pulled up the company directory. 22 years of institutional knowledge meant I knew exactly who to call. "Sandra? It's Richard from Product Development. Remember the compliance training we had last quarter? I have a hypothetical question." By 5 o'clock, I'd spoken with 3 people in legal, carefully dancing around direct accusations while gathering information. I'd learned that routing company funds to a family member's business without disclosure violated 6 different company policies and potentially federal law. I'd also accessed the server logs Roy had mentioned, discovering a goldmine of information. Carson and his inner circle had indeed been using conference room C for after-hours meetings, blissfully unaware that the old recording system was still operational. The files were massive and encrypted, but I had the legacy decryption keys, another piece of institutional knowledge they'd overlooked. My hands shook as I drove home, rain pounding against the windshield, matching the thundering in my chest. The weight of 19 years pressed down on me, the missed birthdays, the canceled vacations, the endless late nights, all for a company that would discard me without a second thought. My daughter Emma's college tuition bill sat unopened on the kitchen counter. My wife Karen's questioning eyes followed me as I paced our living room, the salary reduction notice crumpled in my pocket. "Tell me," she said quietly. So I did. About Carson. About the salary cut. About Phoenix Solutions. When I finished, she didn't offer empty reassurances. Instead, she asked, "What are you going to do about it?" Karen had been with me through everything, the early years when I worked 60-hour weeks for promotions that never materialized, the company retreats that pulled me away from family celebrations, the constant refrain of just one more project. That had become our family motto. She deserved better. We all did. "I'm going to fight," I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. "Not just for my job, but for what's right." Her hand found mine. "Then we fight together." "Dad?" Emma stood in the doorway, her laptop tucked under her arm. At 20, she was already more confident than I'd ever been, her computer science major making her the family's technical guru. "Is everything okay?" Karen and I exchanged glances. We'd always been honest with our children, especially now that they were adults. "My boss cut my salary by 35% today," I said. "And I think he's involved in something illegal." Emma's eyes widened. That's not right." "No, it's not." I sighed. "And I'm trying to figure out how to prove it." She sat down next to me, laptop already open. "What kind of evidence do you have?" That night, we formed an unlikely investigation team. Emma with her cybersecurity knowledge, Karen with her background in corporate compliance, and me with my 19 years of institutional memory. Together, we began piecing together the puzzle of Carson's systematic dismantling of Meridian's ethical framework. At 3 in the morning, I slipped out of bed and opened my laptop. The blue light illuminated my face as I created a new folder labeled Insurance. Inside it, I saved the recording from today. Then I began methodically adding screenshots of emails, project timelines, performance reviews, and meeting notes collected over 3 months of growing suspicion. Emma had shown me how to create secure, encrypted backups that would leave no trace on the company's monitoring systems. "They'll be looking for unusual data transfers," she'd warned. "We need to stay under their radar." As dawn broke, I discovered something I hadn't been looking for. Buried in Carson's email threads carelessly stored on our shared development server was a series of communications with someone named Marcus Keller at Rival Systems, our biggest competitor. The subject lines were innocuous, but the contents chilled me. They were discussing Meridian's proprietary technology and client information, including details about the Blackwell security implementation. This wasn't just corporate bullying. This was corporate espionage. I reached for my phone and texted Elena, "Need to talk." "Not at the office." Her reply came instantly, "Riverside Coffee." 7:30. The morning air was crisp as I waited outside the coffee shop, away from security cameras and corporate ears. Elena arrived exactly on time, dressed in a crisp business suit, her dark hair pulled back in a professional bun. Only the shadows under her eyes betrayed that she might be as sleep-deprived as I was. "You found something," she said, skipping pleasantries. I nodded. "Carson's been talking to Rival Systems, sharing proprietary information." She didn't look surprised. "I've been tracking unusual financial transfers. Small amounts, $10,000, $15,000 flowing through shell companies. Last night, I found where they end up. Offshore accounts? Registered to shell corporations owned by Marcus Keller and James Carson." She sipped her coffee. "There's more. The Blackwell project, it has a security vulnerability built into it. A backdoor." My blood went cold. "Blackwell handles government defense contracts." "Exactly." Elena glanced around nervously. "This isn't just about corporate theft anymore, Richard. This could be national security. We need to take this to Victoria Chin," I said, referring to our CEO. "Before the damage is irreversible." Elena's expression darkened. "You really think the CEO doesn't know?" I thought about Victoria, who had built Meridian from a struggling startup to an industry leader. Her office walls were glass, her commitment to transparency famous throughout the company. Would she sacrifice everything she built for a quick profit? "I have to believe there are still good people at the top," I said. "Otherwise, what have I spent 19 years fighting for?" Elena studied me for a long moment. "You're either very naive or very brave. Either way, I'm in." "There's something else," I said, lowering my voice. "The old conference room recording system. It's still active. I have access to meetings Carson thought were private." Elena's eyes widened. That could be the smoking gun we need." "I need help decoding the financial schemes," I admitted. "My expertise is in systems, not money trails. And I need help understanding the technical implications of these security vulnerabilities," she countered. "We make a good team, Chin." We spent the next week gathering evidence, careful to maintain our normal routines at the office. Carson continued his campaign against me, reassigning another of my projects and making barely veiled threats in management meetings. Each time, I recorded everything, added it to my growing file of evidence, and plastered on a defeated expression to keep him convinced of his victory. The Blackwell situation grew more urgent when I discovered that the compromised security protocols were scheduled for implementation the following Monday. If deployed, they would create a virtually undetectable vulnerability in Blackwell's defense network, a vulnerability that Rival Systems could exploit for years to come. At home, Emma helped me build a secure communication system for our growing team of allies within Meridian. "It's called a dead drop," she explained, showing me how to use seemingly innocuous cloud storage locations to exchange information. No direct communications that could be traced. Karen, meanwhile, pored over company policies and federal regulations, highlighting exactly which laws Carson's actions violated. "This isn't just corporate malfeasance," she concluded grimly. "This is criminal conspiracy." On Friday, Carson forced me to fire 2 of my best developers, loyal employees with families and mortgages. I watched them pack their desks, helpless to explain that this was collateral damage in a corporate war they didn't even know was being waged. That night, I added their termination paperwork to my evidence file, hands shaking with rage rather than fear. "They're accelerating their timeline," Elena warned during our weekend meeting. "The quarterly financials are being prepared early. They're going to cook the books, strip the remaining assets, and be gone before anyone realizes what happened." "We need to move now," I agreed. "But we need to be certain. One false accusation and we'll be discredited forever." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Emma, my college-aged daughter, had come home for the weekend bringing her cybersecurity homework. Over breakfast, she casually mentioned a technique for authenticating digital evidence that would stand up in court. "It's called blockchain verification," she explained, eyes lighting up with the enthusiasm of someone who loves their field. "Basically, you create an immutable timestamp that proves when a document existed and that it hasn't been altered. That night, after Emma and Karen had gone to bed, I implemented her suggestion, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence that no corporate lawyer could dismiss as fabricated or tampered with. "Dad?" Emma's voice startled me. She stood in the doorway of our home office, a steaming mug in her hands. "You should sleep." "Soon," I promised, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I just need to finish this." She perched on the edge of the desk, peering at my screen. "You're really going to do it? Take on the whole executive team?" "Not the whole team," I corrected. "Just the corrupt ones." "Aren't you scared?" she asked softly. I considered the question. "Yes," I admitted. "But I'm more afraid of what happens if people like Carson succeed. If honest work and loyalty mean nothing. If companies can be hollowed out from within while everyone looks the other way." Emma nodded slowly. "My professor says the most dangerous vulnerabilities in any system are the human ones. Not code, not hardware, people who choose to do the wrong thing. And the strongest security," I added with a small smile, "comes from people who choose to do the right thing, even when it's hard." She hugged me suddenly fiercely. "I'm proud of you, Dad." The weight of the USB drive in my pocket felt heavier than its tiny size suggested as I walked through the glass doors of Meridian's executive floor on Monday morning. My hands were steady now, my path clear. 3 weeks had passed since Carson dropped the salary bomb, and I'd used every minute building my case. "Richard, what brings you up to the executive floor?" Meredith, the CEO's assistant, greeted me with genuine warmth. Unlike most, she remembered when I'd helped troubleshoot her computer during her first week, 12 years ago. "I need 15 minutes with Victoria," I said, referring to our CEO by her first name, a liberty earned through years of reliable service before Carson's arrival. Meredith's expression shifted to concern. "She's booked solid today with the board presentation. It's about the Blackwell account and some financial discrepancies." I kept my voice low, steady. "She'll want to hear this before the board does." 10 minutes later, I sat across from Victoria Chin, the woman who'd built Meridian from a struggling startup to an industry leader. Her office walls were glass, her commitment to transparency famous throughout the company. "Richard, it's been too long." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Meredith says this is urgent." I placed the USB drive on her desk. "I've discovered something concerning our financial reporting and project reassignments." Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes sharpened. "Explain." 3 months ago, Director Carson began systematically removing me from projects I've managed successfully for years. Despite record-breaking results, he's cut my salary by 35%, claiming performance issues. Victoria frowned. "HR hasn't flagged any performance concerns with your team. That's because the paperwork Carson submitted claims I requested reduced responsibilities." I leaned forward. "The funds removed from my salary and team budget are being funneled directly to Phoenix Solutions, a consulting firm owned by his wife." Victoria's posture stiffened. "That's a serious accusation." "It's all documented," I said, nodding toward the drive, "including recordings of Carson explicitly threatening me while contradicting what he's putting in official reports." "Recordings?" Her eyebrow raised slightly. "Pennsylvania is a one-party consent state for recordings." I checked with legal. I met her gaze steadily. "There's more. The Blackwell project specs Carson sent to Greg's team last week are missing critical security protocols. If implemented as directed, they would create vulnerabilities in Blackwell's entire network." I slid printouts across her desk, emails between Carson and Marcus Keller at Rival Systems. Emails discussing Meridian's proprietary technology and client list. Victoria's face drained of color. "How did you access these?" "I didn't hack anything," I assured her. "Carson has been using my team's shared development server to store his personal files, assuming nobody would check the archived directories. It's all there, the shell companies, the kickbacks, the corporate espionage." The silence stretched between us. Finally, Victoria pressed a button on her phone. "Meredith, cancel my next appointment and ask Diane from legal to join us immediately." She released the button and fixed me with an evaluating stare. "You understand this will get complicated. I've spent 19 years helping build this company," I said quietly. "I'm not looking to damage it, but I won't be pushed out while someone compromises everything we've worked for." Victoria nodded slowly. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" I thought about the mortgage, Emma's tuition, Karen's worried eyes. I needed to be certain. And I hesitated. I needed to be ready to walk away if necessary. The door opened and Diane from legal entered, her expression curious. Victoria gestured to the chair beside me. "Richard has brought some troubling information to my attention," Victoria began. "I need you to review it immediately and advise on next steps." As Diane slipped the USB drive into her laptop, Victoria turned back to me. Regardless of how this plays out, you were right to bring this forward. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a text from Elena. Carson looking for you. Furious. I showed Victoria the message. He's noticed I'm not at my desk. Let him wait, Victoria said, her voice hardening as Diane's expression grew increasingly alarmed while scanning the documents. This is... Diane looked up, her professional composure slipping. Victoria, the board presentation today will need to be modified, Victoria finished grimly. She turned to me. I need you to return to your desk as if nothing has happened. Can you do that for a few hours while we verify everything? I nodded, standing to leave. And Richard, Victoria called as I reached the door. Don't delete anything else. We may need more than what you've provided. Walking back to my department, I felt strangely calm. The security badge around my neck, the one with 19 years of service pins attached, seemed lighter somehow. Carson was waiting by my cubicle, his face flushed with anger. Where have you been? I've been calling you for 30 minutes. Coffee, I said simply, sitting down at my computer. The Blackwell implementation is failing preliminary security tests, he hissed. Greg's team is blaming your documentation. Of course they were. The documentation I'd provided was correct, but I'd also kept copies of the original specifications anticipating exactly this moment. I followed the exact protocols established in the project charter, I replied calmly. Would you like me to forward you the original specifications with the security protocols highlighted? Carson's expression flickered between rage and uncertainty. Just fix it. Now. As he stormed off, my email pinged with a meeting request. The sender, Victoria Chin. Subject, urgent review. Location, boardroom. Time, 2 p.m. The attached note was brief, bring your laptop and all project documentation. Speak to no one. My phone buzzed again. Karen, this time, did you talk to them? How did it go? I typed back a single line, the truth is finally coming to light. What would happen in that boardroom? I didn't know. But for the first time in months, hope flickered in my chest. Carson thought he was destroying my career, but he had no idea that his own words would be his undoing. The next 3 hours passed with excruciating slowness. I pretended to work on the Blackwell documentation while covertly backing up additional evidence to a cloud server. At 1:45, I received another text from Elena, board meeting moved up. They're in there now. Security just escorted Carson to Victoria's office. My heart hammered as I gathered my laptop and headed toward the executive floor. The hallway seemed longer than usual, the elevator slower. When I reached the boardroom, Elena was waiting outside, her face unreadable. They've been in there for 20 minutes, she whispered. Victoria asked me to provide the financial records we discussed. Before I could respond, the boardroom door opened. Victoria stood there, her expression grim but resolute. Richard, Elena, please join us. The boardroom fell silent as we entered. Around the massive table sat the entire executive team, along with 2 unfamiliar men in dark suits. Carson was noticeably absent. For those who haven't met them, this is Richard Chin, our Senior Development Manager, and Elena Martinez from Financial Auditing, Victoria announced. They have uncovered some troubling information that requires immediate board attention. One of the men in suits stood. Ms. Martinez, Mr. Chin. I'm Special Agent Dawson, FBI Cybercrime Division. We'd like to ask you some questions about the evidence you've provided. Over the next 2 hours, Elena and I walked the board and federal agents through everything we'd discovered, the financial fraud, the corporate espionage, the deliberate security vulnerabilities in government contracts. With each revelation, the faces around the table grew more ashen. Where's James Carson now? I finally asked. Victoria's expression hardened. Security is escorting him from the building as we speak, along with Marcus Keller, who is conveniently visiting our offices today. And the Blackwell project? Elena inquired. On hold pending a complete security review, Victoria replied. Which brings me to my next point. She turned to me, her expression softening slightly. Richard, we need someone with intimate knowledge of the system to rebuild it properly, someone whose integrity is beyond question. I blinked, caught off guard. I assumed my position here was compromised. Victoria shook her head. On the contrary, you've demonstrated exactly the kind of ethical leadership this company was built on. Effective immediately, you're being promoted to Director of Security Integration with a salary commensurate with the role, a substantial increase from your original salary. The room spun slightly. After weeks of fighting to save my job, I was being offered a promotion? And I'd like Ms. Martinez to head our new Financial Integrity Division, Victoria continued, nodding to Elena. With direct reporting to the board. As the meeting adjourned, Agent Dawson pulled me aside. We'll need your continued cooperation in the coming weeks. This investigation is just beginning. You'll have it, I promised. Lawrence Blackwell himself called me that evening. The gruff defense contractor rarely spoke directly with anyone below C-suite level. Chin, his gravelly voice rumbled through the phone. Victoria tells me you're the one who caught this mess before it compromised my systems. Just doing my job, sir. Like hell. You saved both our companies from a disaster. I'm looking forward to working directly with you on rebuilding the security protocols. My team will make it right, I assured him, already thinking of how to rehire the developers Carson had forced me to terminate. I don't doubt it. There was a pause. Chin, people like us, the ones who build things to last, we're becoming rare in this industry. Too many are looking for the quick exit, the fast profit. I respect what you did. Couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, I admitted. But it was necessary. When this contract is done, we should discuss your future. My future? I echoed, confused. Morrison Blackwell is expanding its cybersecurity division. We need leadership that values integrity over profit. Think about it. The investigation unfolded over the next month, revealing a conspiracy more extensive than even Elena and I had discovered. 7 executives across 3 companies were indicted on charges ranging from wire fraud to conspiracy against the United States. The industry was rocked by scandal and Meridian's stock took a temporary hit. But under Victoria's renewed leadership and with a recommitment to the ethical principles she'd founded the company on, Meridian began to rebuild. I worked 16-hour days repairing the damage to the Blackwell system, this time with a team that respected my expertise and a salary that respected my worth. The developers I'd been forced to fire were the first calls I made. How would you like your jobs back with a 30% raise? I asked. Both accepted immediately. Roy from maintenance stopped by my new office, no longer a cubicle, with a knowing smile. Looks like checking those server logs paid off, he said. I owe you one, I told him sincerely. Nah. He waved it off. You did what any of us would have done. Well, any of us with the courage. He paused at the door. By the way, you're gonna need a facilities manager for the new security division, right? Someone who knows the old systems and the new. I smiled. I believe that position just became available. Elena and I became the public faces of corporate integrity, speaking at industry events about the importance of ethical whistleblowing and corporate culture. Behind the scenes, we developed new security protocols that would make future attacks on the system significantly harder. Our collaboration extended beyond work. Weekly dinners with our families became a tradition, her 2 teenagers and my college-age children forming unexpected friendships. Elena's husband Mike, a computer science professor, offered Emma an internship at his lab. Our personal and professional lives intertwined in the wake of shared adversity. 6 months later, as we celebrated the successful completion of the Blackwell contract, on time and fully secure, Karen squeezed my hand under the table. Was it worth it? She asked quietly. All the stress, the fear, the uncertainty? I thought about Carson, awaiting trial along with his co-conspirators. About the employees I'd had to fire, now rehired with back pay and apologies. About Emma, who told me she'd changed her major to ethics in technology because of what she'd seen me go through. It was, I replied. Not just for me, but for everyone who still believes companies can be run with integrity. Victoria clinked her glass against mine. To the future of Meridian, she toasted. And to paying attention, I added, to what people do, not what they say. The manila envelope that had once held my salary reduction notice now hung framed in my new office, a reminder that sometimes what looks like your worst day can become the first day of something much better. And that the most dangerous mistake my boss ever made wasn't cutting my salary, it was underestimating what I knew and who I'd become after 19 years in the shadows. As for Elena, she'd become more than a colleague through her shared ordeal. Her integrity and courage had saved not just me, but potentially hundreds of jobs and a crucial national security contract. This morning, I'd recommended her for the newly created Chief Compliance Officer position. Tomorrow, we begin implementing the corporate transparency initiative we designed together, ensuring that no future employee would suffer in silence as I nearly had. 1 year to the day after receiving my salary reduction notice, I stood before Meridian's annual shareholder meeting, now as Chief Security Officer. The company's stock had not only recovered from the scandal but had reached new heights as our commitment to ethical business practices drew clients who valued integrity as much as innovation. Security isn't just about firewalls and encryption, I told the assembled investors. It's about creating systems where doing the right thing is rewarded, where raising concerns is valued, not punished. As I outlined our new corporate governance structure, I spotted Emma in the audience, recording the session for a paper she was writing on business ethics. Her proud smile reminded me why the fight had been worth it. Later that evening, as we celebrated with a small gathering at our home, Lawrence Blackwell pulled me aside. "That offer I mentioned? It's still open. But I have to say, you've built something impressive here at Meridian." I looked around at my colleagues, now friends, who had stood with me through the darkest days. At Roy, now managing our facilities with pride and innovation. At the developers whose jobs I'd saved, now leading our most cutting-edge projects. At Elena, whose friendship had become one of the most valued parts of my life. "I appreciate the offer," I told him sincerely. "But my work here isn't finished. We're just getting started." He nodded with understanding. "The offer remains open. Good people are always welcome." As the party wound down, I found myself on the back deck with Karen, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "1 year ago, you were ready to walk away from everything," she mused. "And now look where we are." I smiled, thinking of the digital ledger that had started it all, the meticulous documentation of wrongdoing that had ultimately saved not just my career but an entire company. Sometimes the best form of revenge isn't getting even, I reflected. It's building something better from the ashes of what others tried to destroy. Karen leaned her head against my shoulder. 19 years of experience. That's what they didn't understand. You can't buy that kind of institutional knowledge, and you can't replace it overnight. Inside, I could hear laughter as Emma regaled our guests with stories from her internship. The future stretched before us, brighter than it had seemed in years. The digital ledger I created to save my career had done far more than that. It had exposed corruption, prevented a security breach, and ultimately restored the soul of a company I'd given nearly 2 decades of my life to. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't just surviving betrayal, it's emerging from it stronger, wiser, and ready to build something better from the ashes. And as for Carson? The last I heard, he was negotiating a plea deal. His corporate empire crumbled to dust. In the end, his greatest mistake hadn't been the salary cut that pushed me to action, it had been believing that loyalty and institutional knowledge were weaknesses to be exploited rather than strengths to be valued. He never did understand what 19 years really meant.